So my most, I guess, obvious, speaking of our experience at Omega, so we're talking about single location, 4 retorts, 15, 20 people. I did the quick math on if you ran these machines, how many cremations could you do in a month running like 24/7 and working backwards from that. And then I created a maximal, like in this building with what we've got, forget how many people we need to hire and factor in some time for like repairing these machines for being overworked. How much work could you get out of this business? How much could you squeeze out? And the number was like, we were operating as a really large provider with like 3,500 cremations, 3,000 at the time, 30% utilization on those machines, meaning they weren't operational 60% of the time. And so I thought about expanding hours, and then that was blocked operationally, right? So really it came down to the big KPI for me is finding the crematory log sheet and looking at and understanding the biggest problems in our day internally came from our end of day meeting when it was how many bodies do we have in house? That backlog of people want them to be cremated. They're here taking up space in our fridge. How fast can we get those back to families, those folks back to families? And that number, it's just days per, I counted it as days per cremation or days in house. Mm-hmm. That number was like 5.5 when we started, which I assumed was very low because we were so large and efficient. And I thought, okay, every half day you get off that, you get hundreds of more cases per year capacity, or a lot more efficient downtime to just have the employees execute on the finer points to get our Google review rating up. So either way, to me, it was either we're growing and able to embrace that growth or improving the customer experience. Ideally, kind of both mixed together as we go. Yeah. Days per cremation.
Okay. Well, to go on to some of the more technical KPIs and numbers that you were tracking, like what were some of the perpetual numbers that you always were looking at to maintain the health of Omega Society?
Yeah, I think like on a daily basis, we would always track number of new cases and number of cremations to make sure that there's like, we're managing the in and out. That's another way to measure what the days per cremation is, really just like ensuring that we're cremating at least as many as we're taking in, or understanding when we're out of balance. Because that causes a cascading effect that like once you break and go, like once our fridge gets too crowded, cremations we found, like once they're more than the fridge is at 90% capacity, physically moving things around and cremating efficiently, the cremations go from 20 a day to 16, dramatically less. All of a sudden we have a huge problem that compounds on itself and you're constantly digging out of a hole. Mm-hmm. So my thought was, how do we put in barriers to make sure this never happens, or work out of backlogs immediately so that it doesn't cascade? Because it would take, looking at Omega's reviews, you'd see periods of where they're really busy business-wise, their ratings would go down online. And then they would come up again once they weren't so busy, because you couldn't deliver on the customer experience because you're just in this backlog. Everyone's busy. So I wanted to remove those issues in the office so that everyone can be on phones, friendly, nice, not stressed, ready to help people with their best selves.
So were those like kind of the two major ones that you looked at? Just how many cases were coming in every day, and then the days it would take to cremate.
So not to get into too much complexity, but just think about a week. We operated 5 days a week. 2 days we're not operating. Okay, so that's like more than 20% of the week. Nothing's getting done. So you have to do all this work in 5 days. So usually it was like, usually we'd have to outpace the number Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday to be able to leave on Fridays and say we have enough capacity for Monday again. So it's managing this like day to day, but also week to week, in and out. I could make a list of like 40 KPIs. They're all derivations of like 2 or 3, and it's really in and out. And days to cremate tells me how long it took us to really file a death certificate, talk to the family, resolve every single issue, get payment, and then cremate them. So all of those major pieces have to fall into place fast to happen. So that was my North Star. Really simple, really easy. When it got out of whack, I measured this on a monthly basis. So it was a little longer because those are larger trends. But when it gets out of whack, you can start to dig in and say, like, is it the paperwork and families? Is it the
Right.
payments that are the issue? Maybe we raise prices, people aren't
Yeah.
paying as fast. Maybe it's our pickup process. So trying to understand operationally what we need to change. It all kind of comes from that and gives us a good idea of if we're on track to keep getting more efficient, driving that number down. This check on that for me is very simple. Customer experience. I just think, what are they saying on Google and Yelp? If our
Yeah.
reviews are we getting the right volume and the right feedback? I want our star rating to stay high. So we had like 700 by the end when we sold it. It was at 40 when we started. So we got tons of reviews in the
Yeah.
meantime, all very good. And then ad hoc emails, we agreed as a team, we'd all share. So I had access to the team customer service email inbox, and any folks who maybe didn't write a bad review or good review, they would send feedback there. And I would aggregate that too to make sure we're not squeezing our efficiency. I'm not trying to get to like, one
Yeah.
day cremations 100%. Great for business, probably terrible for people because you're hounding them and forcing them to make all
Yeah.
these decisions too fast. So we're trying to find that balance.
Could you maybe give me some metrics that you were tracking on the like maybe the arrangement process?
So every time you manage or measure something, it ends up being something you optimize. And so I was really careful not to overly analyze too much of this, but just get direct signal or approximate signal on these things. Because like I was saying, like it's hard to enact change. And in our team, I didn't want to give them too much and just become this ruthless like metrics guy. I knew it was hard to sell that too much. So I would just look at Parting Pro has pretty good data. I liked looking at, and really what I would do is scan once a day or once a week and just get an idea of like how long is it taking for us to start a case and get all of the forms in that we need, every single thing, not just the core paperwork, next of kin authorization, anything else required, advanced healthcare directives. And what I ended up doing is like, and I tried various avenues. First, I tried empowering employees to manage this themselves. And then I thought it was actually easier to tell every family the same thing crystal clear every time to meet the objectives. So my numbers were, I want days to cremation, days in house, under 5 days, dropping it a half day for the first year. That's how I thought about this. And then I thought, well, biggest delay is what I was told by the team. It was doctors signing off on death certificates. They have their own laws. Doctors are not supposed to hold this up. It should be impossible if they follow the law. It's like 16 hours after death, they have everything done. However, we weren't getting paperwork in. So the root cause was actually paperwork was delayed because we had a really poor communication and setting expectations for each family. So I had changed the paperwork to explicitly state deadlines that would allow us. So 48 hours from the time a passing occurs, all paperwork and payment have to be done. That removes all the blockers that we have. If we can set that expectation, 80% are probably good citizens and we'll march to that drum and do that. We've helped ourselves immensely with zero work. And then the other 20% that can't or don't, they'd be a problem anyway. And we focus all of our attention on those folks because we made our lives easier over here. So that's how I tried to break it down to really get things moving. And we saw, again, like as I would see over time, changing the paperwork or communicating to the team how to talk to families, that time to collect payment and see that easily in Parting Pro and see all the paperwork and seeing that on a screen. It's not a real KPI, but it's like a gut check, a sniff test that tells me what I need to know.